All right, so looking at food deserts, what are the sources of food in your neighborhood? So I want you to take a minute and do some research if you can, using Google Maps is fine. Find your home on Google Maps and look carefully for the three sources of food closest to your home. And that can be any sources of food. So don't just look for the Sprouts Farmers Market, or if you even have that. I don't know if that's an East Coast thing. If you don't just look for the grocery stores, but what are the nearest sources of food to you? So if I were to do this for my neighborhood, for example, the two closest sources of food are a convenience store and a sub sandwich shop. There are three questions that I kind of want you to consider. So what kinds of food are available in these sources? What's the cost of the food relative to a typical grocery store? And what would be the health impacts of a diet consisting primarily of those foods? So if you got up every morning, walked out your door on the way to school, and picked up food from one of these places, how would that impact your diet and health? And then the third thing that I want you to do is find the closest grocery store to your home and think about how far away it is and how long it would take to get there by bus or bike or foot. All right, so you've had a couple of minutes to do that. Now in the Pear Deck chat, let us know, what's the closest source of food to your home? What's there? What's out there close by where you can get food? It doesn't matter what the food source is. I just want to kind of get a picture of what's close to you. Starbucks. Yeah, man. Starbucks is like on every corner out in Phoenix for sure. Looks like the closest is an Italian restaurant. Lucky you, Cynthia. Italian restaurants, good Italian food is a rare commodity out here in Phoenix. I suspect Arizona more generally. Looks like Dunkin' Donuts, McDonald's, Publix, grocery store. Okay, excellent. Mirando Farms, a bakery, cafe, pizza restaurant, Subway, Latin restaurants, gas station, convenience stores, Cuban restaurants. Oh, brilliant, perfect. 7-Eleven, Dunkin'. So what we see is here kind of a diverse range of different food sources. But again, I would point out that a lot of you are putting fast food restaurants or convenience stores in places like Starbucks, et cetera. And this is characteristic of food deserts generally. So food desert is a neighborhood where there's little or limited access to healthy and affordable foods such as fruits, vegetables, whole grains, low-fat milk, and other foods that would make up the full range of a healthy diet. So a typical grocery store would have all of these items, right? And in food deserts, those places are hard to get to or they're far away. And food insecurity is kind of a broader umbrella term that refers to food deserts and other kinds of systems where you have lack of access to sufficient amount of food because of limited funds or limited resources to getting there. And so in America, more than 49 million households are considered food insecure and are vulnerable to poor health as a result. So in most places, you're going to have a student body that has a large number of students who are food insecure, either because they live in food deserts or, for financial reasons. They don't have the money to buy food. Food insecurity means or feels like not knowing when your next meal will be or where it will come from. And according to Feeding America, in 2015, there were 42.2 million Americans that lived in food insecure households, including 29.1 million adults and 13.1 million children. Children headed by, the way that this breaks down is that most of these kids came from single parent households. 22% were Black, non-Hispanic households, and about 19% were Hispanic households. So Black and Hispanic families are disproportionately represented in food insecure. But if you add those up together, that's just over 40%, which means that 60% of the food insecure populations come from other ethnic groups, including white people. And so even though food insecurity and this form of oppression impacts minoritized populations, it also impacts poor whites as well. And so what you'll see is a lot of the language about food insecurity is designed to make it seem like it's a problem for minoritized communities. And that allows policymakers to sort of ignore the problem because that's the history of structural injustice and racism. So here's some statistics, and I won't go through all of these, but 23.5 million people live in low-income areas, or they're more than 1 mile from a supermarket. Low-income census tracts have half as many supermarkets as wealthy tracts, but 2.5 times more fast food restaurants and 30% more convenience stores, which tend to lack healthy food options. 8% of African Americans live in a census tract with a supermarket compared to 31% for whites. And every individual supermarket in a census tract produce consumption increases 32% for African Americans and 11% for whites. So when people have access to supermarkets, they eat healthier food. They eat produce, they eat greens and fruits and vegetables. So food deserts are also probably underreported because North American industry classification systems places smaller corner grocery stores, which primarily sell packaged food in the same category as grocery stores like Safeway or Whole Foods. And so you may not be living in a neighborhood that is designated as a food desert if you have one of these small bodega style convenience stores. What does this look like? Well, most of food deserts are in urban areas, but you can see that there's still a problem for rural populations as well. So in a lot of rural populations, you just have to drive forever to get to a source of healthy food. In urban populations, the distance is shorter, but so is access. But access to transportation is also a problem. So even though you're physically closer to a grocery store without a car, you may be walking or riding the bus to get there, and that would take a long time. Here's what the landscape in America looks like when we start to look for food deserts, right? So this is no car, no supermarket store within a mile. And you can see where all of or many of the food deserts in America are clustered. One of the things that we can do is then take a look at how that might be impacting health related issues like obesity. So if we look at the prevalence of obesity by state in 2015, you see a very similar pattern. So the states with the highest rates of obesity, 35% or more, fall along the lines where we have the highest number of food deserts. Lots of food deserts, and you have lots of obesity. We also see a similar pattern with the percentage of children living in poverty. So a lot of that is concentrated in the Southeast. It's getting worse in places like California, Nevada, Oregon. Not great in Arizona either, but this shows us that the rates of childhood poverty is increasing. But again, it fits with that map for food deserts. And the consequences of food deserts are sort of paradoxical, because this is about access to healthy food. If you don't have access to the healthy food, why should the consequences be things like obesity, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, high blood pressure, cancer, osteoarthritis, breathing problems, sleep apnea? And the reason for it is that the food that is available in these places is different than what's available from the grocery store. Another consideration is that public transportation has a role to play here as well. So grocery stores, aren't in these urban areas that are considered food deserts for a variety of reasons. It may not be profitable, for example, and public transportation is also often limited in these areas. So as a result, if you are going to go to the grocery store to purchase food, but you have a 2-hour commute to and from the grocery store, you're going to probably prioritize smaller loads of food. So you're going to buy less every time you go to the grocery store. And that may influence the way that you shop. You're also probably going to want to avoid items that won't spoil. And so that means you're going to potentially forego some of the healthier perishable foods and opt for things that are highly processed that won't spoil by the time that you get back to your home. And then convenience stores are often full of healthy foods. There are some are full of unhealthy foods, but there are some healthy foods available. However, when you look at what's available that might be considered healthy, they're often sold individually at a 30%, 37% or more markup compared to a grocery store. So hugely expensive to get things that might be healthy and available at a local convenience store. So what does that mean? It means that we are primarily opting for lower quality food prices, lower quality food sources, such as fast food, such as processed food from grocery stores or convenience stores. And one of the problems with this is that while it is harder to get to and access healthy foods at the grocery store and more expensive to get foods that are healthy from convenience stores, there is a market increase in food spending when the sources of food that you have are places like McDonald's. So you can see from this graphic, you're going to pay almost $30 to feed 3 or 4 people at McDonald's, where you could do the same for about half that amount from the grocery store. It's really difficult for people to access that healthy food, even though it would be less expensive to prepare meals using fresh ingredients from the grocery store. And as a result, they're eating a more expensive and less healthy option. Just another quick graphic of showing the difference in cost from a convenience store to what is one innovation, the Twin Cities mobile market, which brings food to people. And so you can't get very much for $30 at a convenience store, but you can get lots of food for the same price from one of these mobile markets. So what are some of the innovations for addressing food deserts? It's more than just providing food. You can't just go in and build a bunch of restaurants and hope that people will use them. Because a lot of times people have lost the capacity to cook and prepare meals for themselves because it's been so long since there was access to healthy option. Yeah, thanks Aubrey for pointing out that I added milk as a healthy option. Yeah. All right. So what are these innovations that can work? Well, education is one way to do that. So not just education for students as pictured here, learning about healthy foods from the USDA, but also cooking classes for adults. And so having adults learn to cook is one important way to increase the likelihood that they will utilize food from the grocery store once they have access. Improving public transportation is another innovation, making it easier for people to get to grocery stores. And then kind of my favorite is mobile food market. So there are a lot of like buses that are converted into mobile farmers market. And so what that tends to do is give people access to food. It's bringing the food to them rather than having the people go to the food. Michelle pointed out there's a huge issue with cultural and local pushback and educating parents since they do the buying. Yeah, totally. It seems sort of unfair to put all this pressure on kids to eat better and eat more healthy food items, and then they go home and don't have the capacity to do that. One of the other things that I think is really interesting with regard to this problem is that it's not just the knowledge and the access to food, but oftentimes it's having the infrastructure to cook. So cooking is something that you have to practice and you have to learn how to do, but you also have to have access to the equipment. So that means pots and pans, that means simple tools like spatulas or spoons, and then even access to ovens. In some very, very poor communities, people are faced with the choice of whether they pay their electric bill or their gas bill or their rent. And oftentimes they're getting by foregoing gas. And if your stove is a gas stove, then you can cook food on the stove. Or they may not pay their electric bill, and so they have no access to electricity for a period of time and aren't able to cook. So it's really not just this one approach. You have to sort of embrace the whole system and try to provide solutions throughout that system.